and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Benway. And today we're going to talk about a few things that are in the air and a few things that are kind of indicative of where the future may lay. Dr. Benway, how's it going? And have you been following the Facebook thing?
Yeah, well, partly because it's my job to somewhat look at these things. And, I took a look before we started the call, or the podcast, I should say, at the earnings transcript from Facebook, the latest quarterly report, some of the infographics that people have been generating. And while I know everybody loves to talk about, oh my God, the single biggest drop in a day, holy fucking shit. I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, yeah, none of this was surprising.
No, well, to those of you who don't know, Facebook dropped like 20% on it was basically a guidance report, right? And it wasn't like it was rather pessimistic and basically saying that growth is slowing down or tapering off and that the margins are going to get narrower. That was it. It wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg has a brain tumor or some shit like that, right? And the thing
there were three big things that are just basic math, right? The growth of revenue is going to slow. Okay, so that means the funnel of new cash coming in is going to narrow and narrow. Doesn't mean no new cash is coming in. It's just not as much at the same rate as before. Okay, we get that. Hey, we got to spend some money on things. We're investing to make sure you're not going to interfere with your fake news. Isn't going to interfere with your day. That means expect margins, which are currently like in the mid 40s, have gone up to like the mid 50s. Not too long ago. We're going down to the mid 30s, guys. Okay, so a 10-point drop. That's the big thing. Less money to play with. It costs more money to make that money, and overall, hey, the user growth, which is related to the revenue growth, that's slowing as well. So that's just basic math to say it's going to cost more to make less money, and so as a result, people said, the value of this stock, which has frankly been skyrocketing for the past few years, okay, time to slow down. So that's why you got a 20% drop.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, in terms of user growth, right? There's a limit to how many users you can have. That is the population of the planet. And as I understand, Facebook is reaching that limit. So it's sort of inevitable.
They're at like they said 2.5 billion users people have interacted with at least one of its apps. So Facebook's has a portfolio of things from their Messenger to WhatsApp, Instagram, all that shit. You have to think of how many computer users there are in the world, right? There's a 7 billion population world. 2.5 billion users already interacting with them on some level. There reaches a point where there just aren't people with computers. Go to Africa. There's not that many computers, I'm sorry to say, to all the people who think it's a vibrant.
No, it's not. Though a lot of smartphones, but that's another story. I mean, there's basically a limit as to how many people can be on Facebook and following Facebook. And the other issue is the narrowing of margins. That's inevitable in any kind of maturing business. And here's something else that I find interesting. In the growth of costs, right, which is basically related to the fact that they said that, we're going to hire 20,000 fact checkers and whatever the hell, right? It's all to appease the PC police. And see, if I'm on Facebook's board or one of its investors, I'm thinking to myself, well, wait. Let's rethink this problem here, because we want to hire 20,000 fact checkers and so forth and so on. But why don't we, instead of trying to police things, why don't we try to do something more passive, where we don't have to hire 20,000 people checking for shit, which is going to be a fucking nightmare to get all those 20,000 people to have a common standard. Why don't we try to do something with the algorithm? Why don't we try to massage the problem? And why don't we try to, quite frankly, not try to police what's on Facebook that much? So that way we have less of a headache for ourselves. You see what I'm saying? I mean, driving things to less censorship because it's just more profitable. Does that make any sense to you?
It does, but here's why they're logically kind of fucked if they do and fucked if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, they're operating under the assumption that our profits are based on the ad revenues.
Right.
So if an ad buyer feels, and I'm not saying this is great thinking on the ad buyer's part, it's just the thinking.
Yeah.
If they ever feel uncomfortable with the environment,
love that word,
Yeah, yeah. So basically, and even if they're they're reasonable people who aren't just like SJWs who say like right wingers ew, they can find themselves easily in a situation where they, their ad appears on a video of, let's say, Justin Roiland drawing the president's son with a cock being sucked by somebody. All they need is people running to them and say, well, how dare you, pull your ad and things like that. It becomes a nightmare to them. They don't want to touch it. So Facebook's response to that is to say, well, we have to be more proactive in order to secure that revenue. The result of that situation being you have to spend more money to get the money that you just currently have, so your margins go down. I think they are kind of fucked no matter what they do, because the stupidity of the thinking of an advertiser is that way. I mean, in my job day to day, because I'm involved with a few organizations that reviews like upcoming products and whatnot, I've seen some of the platforms that the marketers are using. One of the biggest things they're tracking is the volume of negative social media commentary on their various campaigns, and they're designed to make sure that they don't have to deal with that. They're ready to pull campaigns at a moment's notice if shit like that happens.
But I would
So
always think that
unfortunately,
that negative controversy would be a good thing for an advertiser. Because look at the Beachbody Ready thing for Planet Fitness, the thing that happened in London a few years ago, right? That shit went down, and membership exploded because people had never heard of the thing, but all the free advertising because of the outrage machine, it benefited them, and they were smart enough to just troll the shit out of the naysayers. I don't know if you recall on Twitter, their Twitter account just trolled them relentlessly, right? If you all don't recall, the Beachbody Ready campaign was for Planet Fitness. I believe it was Planet Fitness. And they showed this exquisitely good-looking model in a yellow bikini. I mean, she had just a gorgeous figure. And it's just staring right at you, and with this, come hither look, and the ad said, "Are you Beachbody ready?" And everybody was outraged, and the fat acceptance movements, they had a complete hissy fit. I mean, they blew a gasket on that one, right? And the thing is, see, everybody heard about this company because the original campaign was just on the London Underground. I remember I was there. I was there in London when the campaign was on. I was like, man, I'd be riding the subway to some meeting or whatever, and I'd be like, man, this chick is fucking hot. What the fuck is this? And because it was eye catching, but it was a relatively inexpensive campaign that blew up precisely because of all this negative attention. I mean, wouldn't advertisers be into that? I'm asking you because I honestly don't know.
well, that's a little bit different. That's a commentary on the campaign itself. Right. So the Beachbody campaign, if memory serves, that was the one that Sadiq Khan got pissy about. It's
Yeah.
like, we can't have negative, body image feelings. In other words, a Muslim was angry that there was some tits and ass on the London subway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he disguised it as something else. But here's the difference between that and this one. That was directly about the campaign itself. So the virility was about the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
This is somewhat separate, which is to say, it has nothing to do with your campaign per se. It's just simply the fact that your ad ran on this kind of video or this kind of page and whatnot.
Oh.
So then you're getting sort of peripheral blowback, which is you're being punished for things that are outside of your control.
Right.
And that's the scariest thing for a marketer.
Yeah.
I mean, I after encountering people in marketing for many years now, they're a very predictable bunch, which is to say they hate unpredictability,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very terrified of any kind of gossip. They're kind of social chatty Cathys and not necessarily the brightest folks in the bulb, but they're very good at the touchy feely language and whatnot. And so anytime they feel like they're going to run the risk of something like that, getting out of their control, they just flee. It's part of the nature of who they are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, by the way, we're going to be talking about The Attention Merchants, which is a book that the doctor and I are both reading together, of course, because we have just the one copy, and we just FedEx it to one another, and dog ears, dog-eared pages. But what? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a courier take the schmizdot pages, and I have to pay him with a bottle of gin, which he keeps on his saddle because he has to take it by a horse. That's a fucking pain in the ass book to read. I'm not going to lie to the audience.
Yeah, I know. I just find it somehow incredibly tedious because it's well written, but it's tedious somehow. What's wrong with me?
But nothing's wrong with you. What's wrong with the book is that it's written by a liberal bureaucrat from the Obama administration, the same guy who coined the concept of net neutrality. So, that's the kind of bum you're dealing with.
I don't know.
And it's like,
There's something about it. I just find it. Look, I've read like some New Yorker shit. That soggy shit that sort of like goes nowhere, but it's entertaining. There's something about it that your eye wants to keep on reading, right? But this book, every time I try to get into it, I just can't. I just it just doesn't capture my attention. Ironically enough.
I'll tell you why it's bothering me. And this will be like the little titillation before that episode if we ever get to it.
Yep.
The problem with this guy is he simultaneously has an overabundance of judgment and a lack of judgment. By that I mean to say he will have these bitchy asides of like the knowingness of a self-absorbed liberal, which is to say, I know, I can make a quick moral judgments based on my superiority of being able to look back and say, look at these early purveyors of fake news. And yet when it comes to the real moral judgments about what's going on, he's agnostic because he fundamentally knows that his attitude on life is basically has to be approval of the fundamental big picture bullshit that's going on in advertising and attention management and the attention merchants itself. But he's just too much of a tool to really make those claims. So he'll settle for the easy, I'm a good liberal. Look at these old, yuckamucks who do their snake oil salesman tactics. Well, we're much better than them. And the reality is he's not much better than them because he can't make a real judgment.
I have. Let me look at it from that point of view because I hadn't really considered that. Okay, to tell you the truth, because I was actually focused on something else. That I forget when specifically it was. He was talking about something in the 80s, right? And he casually made this causal link between a few things. I can't offhand remember it because I have it written in the book. So when we get to it, I'll mention it. I'll discuss it a little bit more in detail. But he makes a causal link that is just not there because he was not living during the period. He's talking about stuff that I lived through in the 80s. And he makes this causal link that's completely wrong. Now, somebody who wasn't living in the 80s could easily make that mistake. And so my thinking is that, or let me phrase it, somebody who has not lived in the 80s could easily make that mistake if he wasn't fucking careful, if he wasn't really looking at the information. Okay? I wish I could remember what it was, but for the episode, I'll bring it up. But what sort of like made me go like, ew, is that he made such a blatant mistake and created an inference in the mind of the reader that is just so wrong. And I thought to myself, well, what about other stuff? Okay, there's the Melman effect, the Gelman effect, or something like that. It's called, whereby somebody can read 5 pieces of news, and they might be an expert on the third piece, for instance, and realize that the person who wrote that piece is just totally wrong. But he'll just assume that the other 4 are accurate and just go on his merry way. But I have the reverse of that. Whenever I read something that I know about and the writer just does not know what they're talking about, I instantly doubt everything else that they've written. And so what's happened is that there are a lot of interesting things that this book has that I no longer believe in because I know that in the things that he was talking about that I know for a fact, he was just fucking wrong. And he was creating a false inference. It wasn't a big deal because if it was a big deal, I would remember it. But it was something like noticeable. And something like, oh, okay, so this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And this guy just talks out of his ass. Because that's what happens to me. When somebody talks out of their ass on one thing, I automatically deny them credibility in all the other things that I also don't know. Because I assume that if he's making a mistake on something that I know for a fact, then he's making a mistake in other stuff that I don't know for a fact. You see, that's always been my thinking. The reverse of the, what is it, the Gelman effect?
Could be.
No.
I can't recall, but I know the concept of what you're saying.
Yeah, it's the Murray-Gell-Mann amnesia effect. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Google. The Murray-Gell-Mann amnesia effect is the idea that, like I said, when you see several pieces of news and you know about one particular topic and you see one piece of news about the particular topic and you know that the news piece is wrong, you tend to assume that the other pieces are correct. Which I don't quite understand why that would happen, to tell you the truth, because I would always think it's the opposite. If you catch somebody in a lie, you automatically, distrust everything else that they've said. That's always been my way of going. But I don't know. Okay, it doesn't matter. So I'm having a rough time reading the goddamn book, and you are too. I'm glad, frankly, because I was wondering if I was just being a doofus or an idiot or something.
Well, there are just certain books that feel like a chore. That one absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I will admit, like, it's not a book I normally would read, because here's the other thing that's been on my mind that I realized as I was moving books between one location and another and reshelving everything. I'm looking at all of these books that I actually, if this were the time to make a sort of what do you call them, like New Year's resolution,
Yeah.
it would be this. I want to read less, hot topic books, books that are, on the verge almost of self-help. And frankly, these would be books like anything written by, what's his face? He also writes for the New Yorker, the one who talks about, like, you need 1,000 hours to do,
Malcolm Gladwell.
any Malcolm Gladwell book I can't read. All of those other kinds of things, like, all, as much as I think she's entertaining, like the books that your pundits would read, like you're right, like Ann Coulter, or now Lauren Southern wrote one in the very same vein as Ann Coulter. Those books, you read them, maybe you're entertained for a moment, but they're so disposable that I just want them off my shelf. I don't want to keep consuming them. And frankly, a lot of people in our neck of the woods write them. Like, I would never buy Cernovich's book. I frankly have one of what's his face, the Scott Adams books, and it's entertaining enough, but they're not memorable. They're just like, you make you feel good for a moment. It gives you a little witticism or thing to preoccupy your mind, like some exercise you can be aware of to like I said, something approaching the self-help. And I just want less of them. And frankly, there are a few guys who write books in that vein who I think might stand the test of time, of which maybe Taleb comes close. But even that stuff, I don't want them in my life anymore. They're not very fruitful or helpful.
Well, no, it's that the problem with those books is that they are confirming your pre-existing biases, and that's why they are disposable. I mean, like, for instance, Ann Coulter, what's she saying to people in our corner of the woods? And I'm not knocking her. I like Ann Coulter a lot, and I respect her. And I think she's got incredible political judgment. I mean, she saw the Trump train before anybody, and she got laughed in her face. And, well, who the fuck is laughing now, right? So I respect her. But the books that she writes, she's, preaching to the choir. They are just confirming the bias of her audience. And she's making a buck off of it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's her business model. And that is the business model of a whole host of pundits. A lot of pundits with, name brand recognition, they write the book that is confirming what their audience already believes. And that's perfectly fine. But those books are not valuable. They're chewing gum, okay? That's what they are. It's like it's not making you think. And on the opposite, quite the opposite, it's not making you not think. It's making you get outraged, to feel good about yourself. And that, I'm starting to get bothered by it, because a lot of our, and the YouTube community in our area, in our corner of YouTube, the commentary community, it's all about making you feel outraged. Making you feel outraged and just riling you up to no purpose. I don't like that. I fundamentally think that anger and rage at your circumstances, impotent anger and impotent rage at your circumstances, are fundamentally destructive emotions. And I don't think that we should be doing.
Yes, I fundamentally agree with that. I mean, I constantly think to myself, especially, I have a group of friends, like-minded politics. I know they're sooner to get enraged over either whatever the mistake the president may or may not have made, or any kind of development in Europe, name your black pill moment. They will immediately say that the sky is falling. I mean, it is bad enough when we talking about the sky is falling, but I think we make a long-term kind of case for it, as opposed to just saying, like, every last new thing means that the world is over.
Yeah.
But these guys, like, extreme reaction to it, and to the point where I come across as the moderate, saying, like, just wait for 2 days and before you make a final judgment. Actually, it's very similar to what our side's prognostication about what these Facebook numbers mean. you'll say like, "Oh, Facebook, let's take a bet. How long until they're gone?"
It's
It's
so
like, shut the
stupid.
fuck up.
Yeah,
It's
it's
very
just so
stupid.
fucking stupid.
It's myopic thinking. There's nothing in the numbers that suggests it's going to die out, at least in the immediate near term. The stock's already kind of creeping up a little bit. It's like you don't know what you're talking about, kind of thing. But fundamentally, people who keep reminding me, it's like, oh my god, they're just angry and outraged and upset all the time. I think to myself, this is, if I engage and share with those feelings with them, it'll ruin my day unnecessarily. I don't need to be pissed off by virtue of the latest mini moral disaster that's befallen anything. So I kind of just stay half in, half out of it,
Yeah.
and I could just get through my day because I don't want to just be obsessed with all of the latest outrage all the time. Not to say you can't be outraged when shit happens, because sometimes shit is outrageous, but to kind of look for it, because I think that's the danger. I feel like we're looking for an excuse to be outraged. That's even more dangerous.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no question. And what's his name? That Ian Miles Chong guy, he said that when he was at SJW, that was the thing. It was exhausting to be constantly on the lookout for things that would outrage him, okay? That he would find unjust as an SJW, right? And he would be like, it was just tiring to be like that. And in my own case, and insofar as the right is concerned, I just, how could I put it? I don't want to spend my fucking time being upset about the latest SJW nonsense. Because it's fucking, okay, they're stupid. I get it. They do stupid shit and say ridiculous ideas. Fine, but I don't want to watch a 20-minute video about the latest idiocy of an SJW. Give me a little tweet so I can roll my eyes at it and move on.
Right.
But the thing is, see, for quite some time on YouTube, in the commentary section, the outrage machine is where the dollars were and the attention was, right? I'm just, how could I put it? I'm bored with it. I'm bored with it. I want something more productive, okay? And for instance, in my own channel, right, I'm trying to be more productive, deliberately being more productive in the sense of of creating content that gives people something to strive for. Because just being so fucking negative or being so clever and dank and laughing at whatever idiocy, comes across my feed, it's just fucking boring, I mean, I want more to life than that. And so, yeah, and the other thing that really bothers me is that it's just confirmation bias. It's confirmation bias, and so you feel that you're comfortable because you feel to yourself, well, I'm consuming all of this information and it's making me outraged, so I'm engaging in the world. No, you're not. You're just consuming negative news that is confirming your bias about your political opponents, but you're not actually doing anything. You're not actually, thinking constructively. It's just a circle jerk.
Yeah, to put it in another way, you're letting your enemies live rent free in your head
Yeah,
for no good reason, mind
yeah,
you.
yeah,
If you're just, like I said, I've had this happen, and I'm sure it happens to a number of people. Like, you start off your day fine because your personal life could be going well, and you get the latest circle jerk on what's upsetting you in the broader world, and then you've ruined your day. And you don't need to ruin your day just because of that shit, because your day would have been whatever it would have been regardless of this news.
yeah.
It's one thing if to say, like, I don't know, has invaded the United States, they're knocking on your door. It's like, okay, well, that's impacted my day in a very direct kind of way. To say like, oh, the students at Evergreen State University took a shit on the latest, whatever the closest statue is. Yeah, you could have comments about it, but if it's going to affect you getting up and like making breakfast for yourself and getting the newspaper and getting dressed and going to work, you may have taken it a little too far for your life.
Yeah.
That's why I have, and it's kind of also related to the tactics that I said, that we're kind of using to push back on the left, is to say, that's why I've maintained a cynical attitude towards it, where I'm half in, half out of it, is to say, if I start drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit too much and believing every last, accusation I'm saying, I'll just get overly worked up and unnecessarily frustrated with everything.
Yeah.
Just recognize what it is and kind of work and move on.
Yeah, because going back to the attention merchants and the Tim Wu book, right? Ultimately, what's going on is outrage is so easy to manufacture. It's so easy to manufacture it and get eyeballs on your content based on that. I mean, look, one of the interesting parts of the Tim Wu book, I felt, is the beginning of it, when he talks about the rise of the newspaper industry, the tabloid newspaper industry. in New York, because before newspapers had a totally different purpose. They were basically political propaganda, or they had specific news about industry, some industries. I think it was. I forgot. Anyway,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. But what was interesting was, the New York tabloids, when they started up, having some guy at the courthouse to hear the most salacious cases and writing up stories about it, right? Yeah, if it leads, if it bleeds, it leads, right? That's where that famous saying basically came from. Um, and it was interesting to see the development of that. And yeah, horror, outrage, shock, those get the eyeballs, but they don't nurture the soul. They don't feed the brain. Okay. And yeah, I'm just fucking tired of it. I
Well,
want different content.
here's a slightly different use case, but I think it's also a tendency on our side a lot. I think something I worry about myself, which is, I'll give you a really like case example of another book that. So I like Bronze Age Pervert on Twitter. I'm sure a number of people know about him and follow
No,
him.
who's he? I actually don't know.
He's basically like a sort of right wing, somewhat traditionalist on Facebook. Does his epigrams in a kind of not Facebook. What am I saying? Twitter.
Yeah.
In a kind of tweet format. Usually is how I consume him. Pretty interesting thoughts on the day to day.
What's his name again? I'm sorry.
Bronze Age Pervert.
Okay, Bronze
Well,
Age.
he produced a book recently that's out, and people have been reading it in our neck of the woods. Called, I think, Bronze Age, lifestyle or mindset. I probably butchered the title, but it's something. It's Bronze Age something. And I was asking friends. I said, has anybody read this book, and is it worthwhile? And the response was rather telling to me, which was to say, you know what, it was good. It's like a little bit of Evola mixed with this thinker, mixed with this other thinker that I would read in the 90s. And I thought to myself, well, all the thinkers you've listed, I've either already read or I have the books on my shelf. Why don't I just go straight to the horse's mouth instead of some regurgitation, which I think is the other risk we're kind of at here. It's one thing to have a conversation about this, or, references made in tweets or in a short digestible format. But if I'm going to buy a book these days, I want it to be something substantial in and of itself, not just a collection of the greatest hits of books I already own. And that's also worrying in the sense that, are we just repeating prepackaged thoughts that have already been made and articulated much better than we are? I'm worried about that.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't zone out. I was sort of like thinking about it in a more macro level, because I see, on the one hand, I recognize that outrage always sells. Outrage always gets the eyeballs. In this kind of attention-seeking consumer society, is that where all media will eventually devolve to? That it's just outrage and just getting people riled up? And would that be basically the reason why everybody's at each other's throats? I mean, it's a roundabout way of saying, is the very nature of entertainment the thing that is creating the divisions that will lead to, potential apocalypse? Does this make sense to you?
Well, I'll phrase it this way. I think people are, in many cases, correctly seeing the various entertainments and cultural artifacts that are out there as reflections of what they either approve of or hate.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think may happen and could lead to conflict, maybe not, but it'll lead to a certain kind of lack of interesting engagement, is I think everything might become prepackaged in a certain way. So by that, I mean, there's going to be I feel like there's going to be a lot more expectations for cultural artifacts to reflect very specific assumptions and statements or conclusions about, exactly, pandering to the group, reaffirming things. If you do anything that doesn't toe the line of what we prefer to think about culture or society or the certain way, we're going to say, oh, it's another if it's a right wing, it's an SJW book. This guy cucked.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, it's a left winger. It says, oh, it's another alt-right diatribe, neo-Nazi.
Right.
But the thing is, the complication of cultural artifacts is what makes them so interesting.
Yeah.
And worthy of consumption. Because otherwise, it's just give me the latest party pamphlet I'll review it and I'll check off what I'm, that I'm all teed up on the right thought, thinking, thank you. Can I go back to my life?
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
want, and that's what I would really hate for happen to the right wing on our side to kind of devolve too. Yes, there's certain core principles that I want to keep, but if it's all going to be a regurgitation of like, make sure you follow the 27 principles that are important this quarter, otherwise we're going to punch you in the face, that gets kind of dull. And the last thing I think we should be willing to do is come across as the old stodgy right wingers of old. Like if all we're doing is becoming, the old uh, social arbiters of saying, that movie doesn't fit perfectly, let's ban it and burn it, we're going to come across as assholes, just like the left wing is coming across as assholes. And I don't mean this in the sense that you shouldn't fight anybody. God knows you should fight tooth and nail. But at the same time, are you going to be sophisticated enough to allow, interesting artifacts to be produced that don't really fit, preconceived narratives? Because you're not really out there to make sure that everything that's being produced fits exactly what you want. That may be me rambling a bit, but I just worry about that a lot.
Yeah, because like one of the things I've been thinking about doing is a video about pandering, because I got a Twitter DM from a viewer, and he was saying that he really liked my content and he thought it was great. But then he said, he came across a video I did where I talked about Bitcoin. And I said that Bitcoin was a bubble. Bitcoin was just bullshit. And that it was going to pop and that I didn't know when. And he was like, uh, you know, he wrote, then I discovered that you have 1 foot of clay, and he acted like that the fact that I disagreed with him insofar as Bitcoin was my failure. Like I was
Right.
not pandering correctly to the guy. And I'm like, who the fuck are you? I mean, it bothered me,
Right.
and because look, I get like a lot of. I don't mean to sound like an asshole, but I get a lot of messages from viewers. 99% of them are lovely. They are the nicest messages, and I try to respond to them because they're very kind. And the fact that the videos I do move them enough for them to write to me means something, and it matters. And so I try to get back to them. But the point I'm trying to make in this particular case, which was exceptional, okay, I'm not shitting on everybody who sends messages to me. On the contrary, but this guy, he acted like I should be towing the line to make him happy. I mean, i.e., pandering to him. And see, you cannot grow with people pandering to you. You can only grow with friction, the necessary friction, the educational friction. Because without that friction, if it's all smooth, if it's all like buttery smooth, you're not going to grow. You're just going to have your biases confirmed over and over again until finally, that when reality hits, it's not going to be, a little bit of friction. It's going to be like a buzz saw, scraping away your face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because my take is it's not the fact that someone disagrees with me that's the problem. I mean, I love the responses that that people would say like, "Hey, on this point you made, you're full of shit, and here's why." That's one thing. I get that. I'll read the argument and I may agree with it or disagree with it. But it's another thing, which is the example you gave, which is to say there's already been a moral decision made that Bitcoin is a manifestation of liberating yourself from the globalist police state, whatever. And the fact that you wouldn't have already assumed, that that is the case means that, you haven't sufficiently accepted, the core principles, like I said,
Yeah.
of apparently what it means to be on this political side. And nobody fucking agrees on those principles. But just because Mike Cernovich shows up and says, I buy Bitcoin because I've got a lot of stake in Bitcoin. I need my Bitcoin stake to go up. Did you read Guerrilla Mindset? There's a lot of Bitcoin references or preparation, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I get that a lot.
Yeah, I know. No, the other thing I get a lot is that, see, I'm not into conspiracy theories. I think that there's just so much bullshit. That some things might be hinky, sure. But a lot of times it's not out of like some conspiratorial mindset. It's rather just people screwed up and then later try to cover their asses. In the trying to cover their ass, things look a little weird and you're feeling like, what's going on here? But nothing nefarious. It's usually just CYA. But anyway, the fact that I don't buy, for instance, that the Las Vegas shooting was like a big conspiracy. it means, oh, you're blue pilled, you're cucking out. I just find that those kind of purity tests just ridiculous and just absurd. And insofar as Bitcoin, there's something else I realized that I realized it yesterday, as a matter of fact. Because I've always been of the opinion, insofar as Bitcoin, and you, Benway, correct me if you think I'm wrong, that, see, ultimately a currency needs a purpose. It needs to be able to pay for something. You need to be able to pay for something exclusively in that currency, and you must need that currency to make that payment. Okay? And modern monetary theory, the economic school, which I think is just a lot of bullshit, they get one thing right, which is that the currency of a country is the necessary currency to pay for taxes. You live in the UK. The UK tax authority is not going to accept you showing up with yen to pay your tax bill. You have to pay it in pounds. And ditto with the IRS, ditto in Japan, the same thing. The tax authority is not going to accept British pounds. So, the way that the government makes sure that the currency is needed is by way of the tax authority. I don't think it's a principal motivator for the creation of a currency, but it is a factor, an intrinsic factor. But with these cryptocurrencies, number one, there is nothing you need that cryptocurrency to buy that you can only buy with the cryptocurrency. Okay, number one. And the thing that I realized yesterday, which I'm surprised I hadn't realized before, is that, see, all these cryptocurrencies, essentially anyone can create a cryptocurrency. There's been that meme about Coachcoin, right? And somebody suggested, well, why don't you actually do Coachcoin as a goof? Just make your own Coachcoin, your own cryptocurrency, and call it Coachcoin, and distribute it for fun. And I thought that would be pretty funny, but then I thought, oh man, it's going to be like a hassle, and what would it be for? Just a goof that's kind of stupid and too much work for just a laugh. So I just ignored it, right? But then I thought to myself yesterday, any cryptocurrency can be created, right? Therefore, why is Bitcoin, for example, more valuable and a better cryptocurrency than Coachcoin? You see what I mean? There's no clear reason as to why one cryptocurrency would be better than any other cryptocurrency. And since anybody can create a cryptocurrency, for all intents and purposes, right? Then
Right.
it's valueless. All cryptos are valueless because they are, they are endlessly replaceable. It becomes a marketing game. It's just like
Yeah.
Nike and Reebok, because anybody can make a shoe. It just depends how you market it better and how you gussy it up. But shoemaking, it's anybody can do it, and therefore it doesn't really have any kind of intrinsic value. It's all the value of perception. Ergo, it's a mania. Does this logic sound reasonable to you?
It does. That's a fundamental question I have, which is what is backing up Bitcoin at any given point in time?
Yeah.
Frankly, just from all the discussion I hear about the cryptocurrencies, people seem, at least in my neck of the woods, are more interested in the technology behind it than the currency in and of itself. I
Yeah.
mean, that, yes, there's speculation on it, but the blockchain concept and all the tech behind that, has applications above and beyond whatever the latest cryptocurrency is. So that's what is getting people interested. The currency itself, fairly indifferent to. I think people are operating under the assumption, which is kind of odd, especially as you said, like, what's the value in it? What the oddity is that people think that because Bitcoin isn't controlled by a government, you've somehow alleviated yourself from some of the most important shackles of globalist society. And while I superficially get the logic of what they're thinking at, cryptocurrency is not just, gold refound. There's a sociological and history of gold that is somewhat separate from Bitcoin. And to your point, if there's no intrinsic potential value in Bitcoin, it's almost like fiat without anybody at the reins. And so, like, I have no idea where that's going one way or the other. We'll see. I mean, and even if you did think it was going to break up the monopoly of the Federal Reserve System or whoever controls the various purses of money, you're still fundamentally operating in a society that has more tools of control around it above and beyond just the currency system. So I would say, let's not oversell the utopia that's being promised here.
Yeah. I think that's the fundamental issue, that people have this this bizarre idea that it's a savior of some sort. Okay. Um, and by the way, I've never quite understood, or quite frankly, this obsession with the Federal Reserve. Yeah, it's a shadowy group. There's something fundamentally unsound by such uh, uh, a non-transparent entity like the Federal Reserve that has such huge sway over the economy. And I am fundamentally opposed to the notion of the Federal Reserve dictating interest rates, because interest rates, what are interest rates? It's the price of money. And so the price of money should be dictated by the market, not by some central authority. That's always been my thinking. Okay, and I think that this kind of the central bank, the Federal Reserve dictating interest rates is a throwback to like the 17th century. Quite frankly, I think that it's crazy. But okay, that's my opinion. But that's so far as my argument goes. You need a central authority to control the currency. You need it. And I don't understand what the problem is with that notion that you need such an entity. Can you fill me in? Because I clearly am missing, I missed the memo.
Well, sometimes I feel like a lot of this comes from people reading a lot more into Ron Paul's statements than even Ron Paul wanted people to read into them.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ron Paul, in his critiques of the central apparatuses of the financial system, says a lot of what you already just said, which is, hey, look, fundamentally, you have a group of people who have a very intense amount of power just by virtue of what they can control, namely the interest rates, and as a result, the negative externalities of that control, creates significant problems for the average Joe, because they can create inflation at will and fuck up people's lives at will. But I don't think you necessarily have to take it to the next conclusion, like there's smoke-filled cabal rooms where they unzip their human skins and the aliens pop out, and they gather around the local Jew, and the Jew says, here's a shekel for the good goy, and all of that kind of thing. It's like, just the structure of it in and of itself is enough to be upset over. I think people start taking it to near mystical levels at times. And I feel like that's probably a overly simplistic view of conspiratorial mindset that, I understand I'm being unfair, and I do think that in a lot of instances, yeah, conspiracies are just how people operate, but there's a certain degree to which they become so intricate, these theories, that one begins to wonder, is it just a reflection of fact that, hey, a conspiracy did happen here, and that is a result of why X happened versus Y? Or has it become a sort of ordering principle of life? By that, I mean, the fact that there's a conspiracy gives me some comfort, because it says there's a lot of structure and order going on. We're not just, children of randomness. And I say that, you remember, we may have even talked about this on the podcast, of how people really imbue the Kennedy assassination with a lot of conspiratorial lore.
Right.
You just watch JFK to get to get a sense of what that is. But what's fundamentally at play there is, people trying to get comfort in the fact that, hey, look, the president wasn't just killed because some freaky guy lost his shit and got lucky on a shot, right? No, it was a very heavily orchestrated ballet between the CIA, FBI, the mafia, the army, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, because they always got along so well.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to killing Kennedy. That, hey, there's a dance and a rhythm at play in the universe. It's understandable.
Hey, and Nixon was in Dallas at the time, so he must have taken the killing shot. Yeah, it was Nixon who did it.
Just keep it steady, Jack. I gotta hit you between the fucking eye.
Yeah, look, my thinking about the whole Kennedy assassination, yeah, Oswald probably did it, okay? And if it was a conspiracy, well, by this time, we're never going to know. It's too many decades. And even if it were to come out, who gives a shit? It was 50, 55 years ago, and so why grind on this shit? But yeah, I suspect that what it is the replacement for religion. All these conspiracy theories, they give a narrative flow to reality, that it's all being controlled by malevolent forces, granted, but at least controlled. I think that it gives people comfort. I think that that's ultimately the thing with conspiracy theories. And they're fun, to indulge in once in a while, because sure, I indulge in them once in a while. But to really, think, do I believe this shit? No, no. I mean, all of these conspiracy theories are nuts. For instance, I recently saw one that I would think is very non-controversial, and I recommended it, by the way. A video, I can't cue it up right now, but it was this filmmaker, an obscure guy out in Holland, but an American who's living out in Holland. And he did this video, about 15 minutes long, and he explained something about the moon landing. And this filmmaker, he says that in 1969, the technology existed to get to the moon, but not the technology to fake a moon landing. And it's very interesting because as a filmmaker, he discusses why it would not be possible to have faked the moon landing. Okay, and he goes into detail, and he talks about all kinds of stuff. Like lighting perspectives. Like all kinds of people saying that, oh, the light doesn't match, blah blah, which is nonsense. Okay, anybody who knows a little bit of lighting, insofar as filmmaking is concerned, will recognize instantly that all the light on the moonshots, they all came from a single source of light that was 250,000 miles away. That is the sun, right? It was, or more, however millions of light. Yeah, it's not 250,000 miles. That's the distance from the Earth to the moon. I forget how far away the sun is from the moon, but
The equivalent of 8 minutes or 10 minutes of travel.
yeah, at light speed. Yeah,
At light speed.
yeah, exactly. Isn't it 7 light minutes? It doesn't matter. The point I'm trying to make is that, see, anybody who knows anything about filmmaking, about lighting, will know that they couldn't have faked those shots. Okay, and I've seen websites where they go on, and I'm reading them, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. For example, one of the things that they say that, oh, Neil Armstrong got off the lunar module in the shadow, so how come he's lit? Well, yeah, ash reflects sunlight, okay, for crying out loud, okay? And like other stuff that this filmmaker brought up, he's like, how come you can't see the stars? The sky is black, right? If you were in outer space on the moon with no atmosphere, you'd be able to see the stars, right? And I'm like, dude, it's because of the exposure, because the exposure was set
Yeah.
so that you could see the ground. If you had opened your exposure more, yeah, you would have seen the stars, but everything would have been blown out. Everything would have looked white. Okay, I mean the lunar module, the astronauts, everybody else, it would have looked white in order to open the iris on your camera enough to be able to perceive the stars up in the sky. So it doesn't make any. I mean, it makes sense. Okay, it makes complete
Just try
sense.
photographing the night sky with your cell phone camera and see how many stars you pick up. That's all.
Exactly. And so, the conspiracy theories, right? Well, anyway, this video is very, very good. I'll leave the link in the description. But what I wanted to say about this conspiracy theory stuff is that, see, most of the people making these conspiracies don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They talk about something and they claim, oh, it's a conspiracy, oh, it's a lie, Kubrick did it, Kubrick filmed it, blah, 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 right? But if you know a little bit, you realize that it is impossible. That is just absolutely impossible. No way they could have done it, because this filmmaker, he's correct. The technology existed at the time to get to the moon, but not to fake it. Not the video technology, not the filmmaking technology. Today, it's possible. You can do a lot of stuff with CGI today. But even so, there are always telltale signs, because the guys who know CGI, they can always spot, oh, that shot's CGI. And how? How can you tell? Because you and I might look at it and it looks perfectly fine. And they'll say, oh, look at that little detail, that tells you that was CGI. And that's that, because the guys know. And I think that's the thing about conspiracy theorists, because we have such a plethora of information that people assume that they can access the information, and therefore by just hoovering up some information, they become an expert. And since they're an expert, they can talk about something that they really know nothing about and make the most blatant mistakes, the most, first semester mistakes, and nobody's going to catch on. And because their story, their conspiracy theory is going to hang together enough that people will buy their brand of bullshit. See?
Well,
Yeah.
that's a very common with grand theories, is that grand theories tend to work when you're the fundamental believer of the theory doesn't know shit about the underlying principles that it's commenting on.
Yeah.
This was one of my favorite quotes of Marxist history or post-structuralist history, which is they're fundamentally predicated on the idea that you don't know anything about history, and thus you can say that when this happens, it means X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Right. That's another example. Or post-structuralist literature. It's like, oh well, clearly X, Y, and Z meant this, that, and the other. And it works best if you have no idea of how the author chose to write his or her book, how the technique of the writing is or is not functioning. All of those, technical and historical skills are probably a hindrance to your theory than an asset. And if that's the case, then the theory is bogus.
Well,
But unfortunately, that's very common.
yeah.
In a lot of it.
Yeah, and also if you think about it, post-structuralism sort of like thrives on ignorance. And it's so bizarre that it has totally captured the university environment. Because post-structuralism, postmodernism, basically, it works if you don't know jack shit about anything. Then you can just blue sky. And that's what feminism is, basically. It's just blue sky. It's just talking about stuff out of their ass without having any notion of what's reality. And it seems to me that that's the problem. Our population is getting more ignorant, and the bubble is getting more hermetic, where people are insisting, demanding that everybody who enters into their bubble espouse exactly the right thing, the right thought, and not deviate, right? Pander to them constantly, all the time. And that kind of atomization and bubble life is it's just wrong. It's very frustrating to me because the kind of channel that I'm trying to make is a kind of channel where people actually realize that they have to rub up against the world and take their lumps and learn from those lumps, because that's the only way you can possibly learn, right? In a weird way, I think that my channel is an education channel, and the education being taught is that life sucks, get a helmet, and the only way you're going to learn is by trying and failing. You have to try and fail until eventually you might succeed, maybe, right? That's the basic message. But so many people are sort of like, they sort of like agree with the message in principle, but a lot of times when it actually comes to the moment of crashing into reality, they shy away from it, which is, well, I suppose it's the way we're living today.
Well, I think that's a lot of human nature as well. I mean, it's very easy to get principles backed up because you don't have to, as it were, bear the fruit of the of what they actually mean, right? Which is to say, I think it's easy for people, again, which is leading directly to our potential doom and gloom outcome here, which is to say, if a civil conflict in the country is coming, I think it's easier for some people to say, bring it on, get it over with. It's another thing to confront that when the conflict is right in front of your doorstep and it's knocking. Then you, oh, maybe I don't want this, or hey, I don't think I can handle this. That is very, very, I think, apparent in everybody these days, which is to say, I think a lot of us have been operating under the assumption that the bullshit we just say on the internet, and we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it, certainly, is one thing, but we don't have to ever worry about, confronting the realities of it. I think we're starting to reach situations where we're forced to confront the realities of it. And some of us may be better at it than others. I don't think that I'm particularly good at it, but I know that's something we have to face.
What are you talking about specifically?
I think, like I said, if someone said like, fuck, this, that, or the other, I'm going to attack this, set of people any way I can, and God be damned of the consequences. Well, if someone did that exact same tactic to you, you'd make quiver at the result of, oh my God, my let's say my livelihood may be gone. It's not fun to have to confront that and say like, oh, it doesn't matter because I'm a warrior, I can handle it. And not everybody can handle being attacked in a very kind of aggressive, in your face, real kind of way.
I was thinking of something else. It popped in my head. What's her name? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Or as I call her, that girl with her foot in her mouth, right? Who keeps on fucking up, man. And what's his face is still on the ballot. Her opponent from the Democratic thing, and I think that he might win. Actually, I think that she's fucking it up. And I think that he is out there in his precinct, very sottovoce kind of like campaigning, or else he would have pulled his name from the ballot, no problem. I think that he's doing everything he can to hold on to his seat. So anyway, the thing though about her is that she's an outlier, but she's not. She's an outlier of things that are coming. Okay, because that kind of woman, you're seeing more and more of her, and you're going to start seeing more and more of that kind of like willful ignorance. I don't know where I'm going here. Save me, because I have like I have disparate thoughts, and I'm trying to put them all together into one coherent package so we can tidy up the show. And but I'm adrift here. So help me, Benway. Save me. Throw a life vest at me.
Well, stop talking so I can help you, man. So the thought when you said that, another thought that had occurred to me earlier with regard to her is that I think idiocracy is occurring, but not in the way that people probably thought. So in Idiocracy, remember it was the Matt Judge movie where the idea was, rather than society continually advancing of, survival of the fittest and the smartest and the most capable people continue to breed, we reached a point where we have no real, existential or physical enemies on the planet that could, force us to adopt the Darwinian mechanisms of natural selection. So as a result, those traits don't really go forward, but basically stupid people breed more at the end of the day, and wealthier, smarter people find excuses not to. And to a certain extent that's happening, but in the movie they predicated the idea that like the upper middle class people would be the ones who would stop breeding, and it would be the lower class white people who just kept fucking and would produce kids. The reality is somewhat different, which is the reality is it's the various enriching minorities which are breeding a lot. And I think whenever I see Ocasio-Cortez and her shit eyes, as I like to think, crossed eye picture.
Sanpaku eyes. Black Pigeon Speaks clued me in. I had no idea what this Sanpaku eyes. It's when it means literally three whites in Japanese. It's when you can see like the whites of the person's eyes both on the left and to the right of the iris, but also either above or below. And to the Asians, apparently, Sanpaku eyes is just very, very bad, because it means that somebody is either a psycho or severely infirm, or they're just going to have very bad karma. Okay, Sanpaku eyes. That's the word of the week. Okay. But anyway, you were saying about.
But anyway, I think she's a manifestation. She's a manifestation of that. She's a manifestation of someone who's not particularly clever, but prone to, politics that really lend themselves well to not particularly clever people. Namely, if I just demand shit from other people, I'm going to get it. That attitude. She exhibits that, but she also exhibits the laziness and the lack of professionalism when it comes to campaigning. I know she can say, well, I won the district, but when it comes to saying, not saying shit that will fuck up her broader team, she's not very good.
No, she's a complete disaster. I'm wondering what Bernie Sanders, because she's out touring with Bernie Sanders. I wonder what Bernie Sanders thinks of her. Because she's made like several Freudian slips. Like, for instance, she said, she's waiting for everything to turn red, all the districts to turn red, and she doesn't realize that the Democrats had their color is blue, not red. And so it's like, oh man, was that a Freudian slip? Were you saying what, that you're hoping everything goes commie or goes Republican? Which of the two, And she's made some other gaffes. Oh yeah, remember that interview where she just made a complete hash of the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing? And that's something else, by the way, that I'm finding really interesting, that the pro-Israeli lobby is getting awfully nervous with these extreme leftists, because these extreme leftists do not like Israel at all. I mean, they are anti-Israel. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're anti-Semites yet, but they kind of are getting there. Or am I reading it wrong?
No, I think they are. I think that's absolutely the case in Britain, for example, where basically all the brown folks, all the Pakistanis, put it bluntly,
Yeah.
um,
The
are
Asians, the Asians.
yeah, the Asians in Britain, my favorite euphemism. They really, I think, despise the Jews. I think it's above and beyond. Yes, you could say that it's all politics in Israel, but I'm willing to bet you a good shekel or two that they're not a fan of Jews per se. And I've told this to you before. I think, especially the Jews in Britain, realize that you know.
The
I
jig is
think
up.
the Pakistan, not that necessarily that the jig is up, but if the left wing laborites, of which a lot of them are, let's face it, the Pakistanis, get into positions of power, they can make it life difficult for the Jews in Britain. And the thing is, and I've told you this as well, is that the degree to which Jews in Britain bite both, attack both sides of the political spectrum and annoy everyone by playing both sides of the streets, eventually both sides will come to resent you.
Yeah.
So I would say play it a little bit smarter than
Yeah.
you have been playing it, because my suspicion is, like I said, I think that the brown people are looking to take over the Labor Party. In many instances, they have high seats of power in the Labor Party. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, is. I don't think he, in and of himself, is particularly anti-Semitic. I think most of the attacks against him personally, as the overseer of anti-Semitism, is kind of laughable. But I do think that presence is there in the party, and I think it just exists outside of him. But it's the guys like Sadiq Khan, Naz, whatever the fuck her name is, go down the list. Yeah, when those shitheads reach a significant percent of the country, which I think they already are, they're going to start calling shots, and I can easily see them doing, regulations against, kosher cooking, or not cooking, but meat attending or preparation or whatever the fuck is
the
the best way
halal
to
thing. Yeah.
describe it. Well, the halal thing, I can
Or
see
you're
them
talking
doing
kosher, kosher
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, I can see them doing things against various other Jewish practices, circumcisions. I think they can and will try to make it uncomfortable for Jews to be in Britain. And I will laugh because I remember for a long time how Jews in Britain loved to say that the English were just casually anti-Semitic, this, that, and the other. I said, well, if you think that's the case, just wait till your old friends get in charge.
Yeah.
Then you'll
Yeah.
really see how the game is played.
Yeah, but I'm wondering about the United States.
I don't even know how the fuck we got here.
No, it doesn't matter.
But I think, but that's common. I think that is brewing in the United States, and it's been there for a while. In part because for a long time, African Americans in this country, on some psychological level, saw the conflict between Israel and Palestine as something of a proxy between their conflict with the white man, and a lot of times the white man got manifested as a Jew. Because if you think about certain areas in the urban areas, like who would potentially be willing to be a landlord for a rougher community? Well, Jews would do that. There were plenty of them. It's not saying like, oh, all blacks just hated Jews in particular, but they were in some sense the closest white people around. And it's funny because the Jews historically in the United States were very liberal and friendly to the black community, were heavily involved in the civil rights movement, but eventually that kind of started to shift in the 70s. And it, as I said, things started to overlap psychologically with the Middle East to the point where those minority interests in the United States started looking at Jews as sort of like your uber white guy. And so Jews have this interesting, this is what people have noticed it, they sometimes feel like they're white people because other minorities think of them as white, and other times they don't feel like a typical white person because white people historically didn't think of Jews as of the same kind of group. So it's neither fish nor fowl, and it just creates complications as a result.
Well, also Jews today are not helping matters much because they keep kind of like skipping, bouncing between the two lines. I've seen Twitter people both identify themselves as white people and as an ethnic minority. Well, make up your mind which one you are. Okay, because they say, oh well, my fellow whites should do X, Y, Z, but me as a Jew, I'm like, E, D, E, F or whatever. It's always like, there's always a sense that they're skipping between that line between being part of the white majority and being an ethnic minority. And they keep skipping in order to maximize their own benefit or the maximum disapproval on non-minority people, let's say. Okay.
It's funny because polls get the same thing, but it's the opposite of usually where the Jews are tending to go, which is to say, polls are always, they're either white or not white, depending on which is the worst outcome for them.
Yeah.
So among wealthier whites, they, poll, like old times, like the WASPy people. Oh, you're displaced persons, which got turned into dumb Pollock. It's like, you're not really white people. You're the dirty trash of the East. The Eurasians. It's like, okay, so we don't count. But then when you're among minorities, you're gonna try to fucking play the game that you're a minority. No, you're just another white man like anybody else. So it's fuck you no matter what end of it. I think Jews try to play it the opposite way, which is they're trying to get the most benefit out of whichever situation it is. So which is to say, hey, if it's better to be white at this moment of time, I'd like to be thought of as white. If it's better to be thought of as a minority at this point in time, I'd like that. That's a survival instinct. I don't begrudge anybody for doing that. It will eventually, though, cause annoyance with certain people if you tell them you should or should not be doing X, Y, or Z because of who I am. Like, dear fellow white people, you should fuck yourselves. Like, okay. But hey, don't fuck me because I'm not white. It's like, okay, well, that's starting to annoy people.
I don't know. And look, we've been going on for about an hour and a quarter, and I think we might be spinning our wheels a little bit. But anyway, it's been an interesting conversation. And I think that we might have... I think ultimately the whole point is to be thinking more outside the box. Man, this was a weird conversation. I mean, it went all over the goddamn place. But it was fun. I hope it was fun for listeners. Benway, I hope it was fun for you.
Really got my trousers off. I'm just ready to go.
Okay, so on that slightly disturbing imagery, let's call it a podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill. Thank you so much for listening to the Coach and Benway podcast. And Dr. Benway, why don't you leave us, if you will, with a final thought?
It's hard to do that. I'll say this. Consider what you can do in your own little way to help drive Facebook's margins down just a little bit under their projected forecast.
Yeah. If all of the listeners of this podcast were to stop using Facebook, we would bankrupt it within hours, minutes probably. So please, I beg you all, stop using Facebook so that we can show our power, exercise the power of this podcast. And so on that crazy note, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much for listening to us, and take it easy.